10 Most Mysterious Disappearances in American History. Chapter 1: The Vanishing of Brandon Swanson. On the night of May 14, 2008, 19-year-old Brandon Swanson stepped into a quiet Minnesota night and disappeared in a way that still challenges logic, evidence, and every tool available to modern investigators. His final moments were not captured on a camera, nor witnessed by anyone. Instead, they were transmitted through a cell phone, a phone call with his father that lasted 47 minutes, containing Brandon's final words, his last footsteps, and a sudden, unexplained moment of terror that ended the call, and ended every known trace of him. To this day, no evidence, not a shoe, not a scrap of clothing, not even a cell phone case has ever been recovered. Brandon's disappearance stands as one of the most mystifying vanishings in American history, a case where the only witness heard the final moment through a speaker, and still has no idea what happened. Brandon Swanson was a typical Midwestern college student, polite, friendly, curious, and hopeful. Born and raised in Marshall, Minnesota, he had a gentle personality, a calm presence, and a future that seemed straightforward. He studied wind energy technology at Minnesota West Community and Technical College, a field that fit his practical mindset and the landscape around him. Family and friends described him as responsible, not impulsive or reckless. He was a young man who followed rules, respected boundaries, and enjoyed simple things, spending time with friends, talking with neighbors, studying, driving back roads at night with the radio low. On May 14th, Brandon did what hundreds of thousands of American students do at the end of a semester. He attended a small celebration with classmates. This wasn't a rowdy party or a chaotic gathering. It was calm, friendly, made up of people who knew each other well. Witnesses later told police that Brandon had a few drinks but appeared completely sober. He did not slur his words, stumble, behave strangely, or show signs of intoxication. There was nothing unusual about the night, nothing foreboding, nothing that suggested a tragedy was only hours away. Around midnight, Brandon decided to leave and drive home. The route from Lynn to Marshall was familiar. He had driven it countless times. But that night, whether because of darkness, fatigue, a wrong turn, or simply the disorienting nature of rural roads, Brandon became lost. Minnesota farmland at night is deceptively uniformed endless fields, gravel roads that blend into one another, intersections without signs, and miles of terrain without a single street lamp. Once you drift off a main road, everything begins to look the same. At around 12:30 a.m., Brandon's car slid off a gravel road into a shallow ditch. It wasn't a crash in the dramatic sense. The car had no visible damage. The airbags didn't deploy. The windows weren't shattered. Brandon wasn't hurt. But the car was stuck, the wheels unable to gain traction in the loose dirt. Realizing he couldn't free the car on his own, Brandon reached for his phone and did the most reasonable thing he could. He called his parents. His father, Brian, answered. Brandon explained that he was fine but stuck and needed a ride. He told his parents he believed he was near the small town of Lind, a logical assumption, given the direction he had been driving. His parents agreed to pick him up and told him to stay put. They got into their truck and began driving toward the area. Throughout the drive, Brandon stayed on the phone, attempting to describe landmarks or lights that might help his parents locate him. But the more they talked, the more confusing things became. Nothing Brandon described matched what his parents were seeing. Brandon said he could see the lights of Lind in the distance. His parents couldn't see anything that resembled what he was describing. They drove up and down the area for several minutes, headlights sweeping across gravel and dirt, searching for any sign of their son's vehicle. Brandon grew frustrated. He insisted he knew where he was. His father insisted the landmarks didn't match. It became a disorienting dialogue to people trying to describe the same area while standing miles apart without realizing it. Eventually, Brandon told his parents he would walk toward the lights he believed were Lind. He planned to meet them at a well-known public spot, a parking lot near a community center. He told his father to stay on the line as he walked. His father agreed. This single decision for Brandon to walk into the darkness created one of the most haunting mysteries in Minnesota's history. Brandon stepped into the night, phone pressed to his ear, talking casually with his father. The surrounding landscape was pitch black. In rural Minnesota, when the moon is low, night is total darkness, deeper than most people ever experience. There are no streetlights, no traffic, no houses for miles. Just the faint crunch of gravel, the rustle of tall grass, and the sound of your own footsteps echoing in the still air. Brandon narrated his walk. He mentioned passing fences, stepping over uneven ground, and moving through areas where grass grew tall enough to brush his legs. He could see the lights ahead. He seemed confident. His father remained on the phone, listening carefully, offering reassurance, letting his son know he wasn't alone. Despite the eerie darkness around him, Brandon never sounded afraid. He wasn't panicking. He wasn't out of breath. He wasn't confused. His tone remained steady, the voice of someone simply navigating a mild inconvenience on an otherwise normal night. For nearly an hour, father and son spoke, trying to describe their surroundings, trying to figure out why nothing matched, trying to make sense of a night that felt just slightly misaligned with reality. Then, without warning, everything changed. 47 minutes into the call, Brandon suddenly interrupted the conversation with an exclamation. "Oh shit." The words were sharp, startled, not confused, not irritated, startled. Immediately after that, Brian heard a sound, not a scream, but a brief rush of movement, like someone stumbling on uneven ground. There was a grunt, a moment of chaotic noise, and then silence. Brian called out into the phone, "Brandon, Brandon." Nothing. He repeated his son's name over and over, voice rising with fear. Still nothing. The line remained open, no hang-up, no busy signal, just silence. A silence so complete and unnatural that Brian later described it as terrifying. He knew immediately something was wrong. This wasn't a dropped call. It wasn't a dead battery. It wasn't someone choosing not to answer. It was the absence of Brandon, an absence that felt instant and absolute. Brian and Ann SWANSON called the police at once, but authorities dismissed their fears. They insisted Brandon was an adult and had the legal right to disappear if he wanted to. They refused to dispatch a search until morning. The SWANSONs were horrified. They told police about the fall, about the open line, about the sudden silence. They insisted Brandon was in real danger, but the officers remained unmoved. While police declined to act, the SWANSONs did not. They drove back and forth across rural roads until sunrise, desperately searching the darkness for any sign of their son. But by the time daylight arrived and police finally joined the search, hours of critical time had been lost. When investigators eventually located Brandon's car, they discovered something that rewrote the entire timeline. Brandon was nowhere near Lynn. He was nearly 25 miles away, near Taunton. His assumption about being near Lynn had been wrong, and because of this, every direction he gave his parents during the call had come from the wrong map entirely. The miscommunication was tragic in hindsight, but understandable. Rural backroads can feel identical to each other at night. In the wrong direction, even the lights of a distant farm can look like a nearby town. Bloodhound dogs were brought in to trace Brandon's scent. They followed a path from his abandoned car, across fields, and toward the Yellow Medicine River. The scent continued along the edge of the river, as if Brandon had walked beside it for some time. Then it abruptly ended at the riverbank. This discovery led many to believe Brandon may have fallen into the river during his walk, a theory that seemed to match his startled exclamation before the line went silent. But divers found nothing. The river was shallow in many areas, and bodies typically surface after days or weeks. Yet no trace of Brandon ever appeared. Not clothing, not shoes, not a phone, nothing. Some investigators believe Brandon may not have fallen into the river at all. They point out that phones submerged underwater typically disconnect instantly, yet Brandon's phone remained connected for minutes after the silence. This suggests he may have fallen onto something, not into something. Perhaps he slipped down a slope, tripped into a hole, or fell onto thick brush. Rural Minnesota is dotted with hidden hazards, abandoned wells, cisterns, drainage tunnels, old farm structures left to decay in fields. Another theory suggests he continued walking after the fall but lost his phone in the process. Hypothermia is a possibility. Nighttime temperatures were cold enough to pose a risk. If Brandon became disoriented, he could have wandered miles from the last known point of contact before collapsing somewhere search teams never examined. Even then, the total absence of physical evidence remains baffling. A darker possibility is foul play, unlikely, according to police, but not impossible. In rural areas, a single isolated farmhouse, a passing truck, or a confrontational stranger could have crossed his path. But no evidence supports an abduction or assault, and investigators found nothing to suggest another person was ever near him. The most chilling part of the case is not what was found but what wasn't. Hundreds of volunteers searched farmland, drainage ditches, fence lines, and river corridors for years. Investigators combed thousands of acres, used helicopters, thermal imaging, cadaver dogs, and seasonal searches after the snow melted. Yet not one piece of Brandon's life, not a button, not a shoelace, was ever recovered. His disappearance remains a paradox, a vanishing with witnesses but without evidence. The tragedy of that night eventually led to change. Because officers initially refused to search for Brandon, Minnesota lawmakers passed Brandon's law, requiring immediate police action when any adult is believed to be in danger, regardless of age. His parents' advocacy ensured that no other family would hear the words, "He's an adult, there's nothing we can do." But this legislative victory brought no closure. 16 years later, the call that ended so suddenly still echoes in the minds of Brandon's parents. His father remembers the exact tone of Brandon's voice, calm, steady, normal. Up until the final second, he remembers the noise, he remembers the silence that followed, and he remembers the moment he realized his son was gone, not because a call dropped, but because something happened on the other end of the line that no one can explain. Investigators, journalists, psychologists, and search experts continue to study the case, but every theory collapses under scrutiny. A person cannot vanish mid-sentence. A person cannot disappear without leaving a single trace. A person cannot walk for nearly an hour, narrating every step, and then cease to exist in a landscape that has been searched more thoroughly than most crime scenes. And yet, that is exactly what happened. To this day, the disappearance of Brandon Swanson remains one of the most perplexing, haunting, and unnerving mysteries in American history, a case where the last witness heard everything, except what happened. Chapter 2: The Disappearance of Brian Shaffer. On the night of April 1, 2006, 27-year-old medical student Brian Shaffer walked into a popular bar in Columbus, Ohio, and vanished. Not into an alley, not into a river, not into a stairwell, and not into a car. He vanished from somewhere that should have been impossible to disappear from: a bar surrounded by security cameras, police activity, crowds, and brightly lit college nightlife. A bar where dozens of people recalled seeing him. A bar with only one entrance and one exit that was fully covered by surveillance. And yet, Brian Shaffer walked inside, and never walked out. The disappearance is so baffling that seasoned detectives refer to it as one of the strangest cases in American history. It is a case where every logical explanation collapses, every theory contradicts itself, and every frame of footage only deepens the mystery. A case where a man seems to have slipped through the cracks of reality. To understand how someone could vanish from a place designed to prevent exactly that, we must begin not with cameras or theories, but with who Brian was and why, of all people, he was the last person anyone expected to disappear. Brian Shaffer was a second-year medical student at Ohio State University, a driven and disciplined young man with a promising future. He was intelligent, charismatic, and admired by classmates. Despite the heavy workload of medical school, he found joy in simple things: playing guitar, traveling, listening to Jimmy Buffett, spending time with friends, and planning a trip to Miami with his girlfriend, Alexis. He had no enemies, no criminal history, no secret double life. Everything about his trajectory pointed upward. But beneath the surface, Brian was grieving. Just 3 weeks before he disappeared, Brian's mother, Renee Shaffer, passed away after a long battle with cancer. He was devastated. Friends and family described him as shaken but functioning, still attending classes, still making plans, still talking about the future. Some believe he masked his grief, others say he handled the loss well. But everyone agrees the pain was fresh, and the emotional weight on Brian was immense. On March 31, 2006, the last night anyone saw him, Brian planned to welcome spring break by going out with friends. The quarter had been difficult, classes demanding, and the combination of pressure and grief had worn him thin. His father, Randy Shaffer, remembers their final conversation earlier that evening. He recalls Brian appearing exhausted physically and emotionally, but hopeful. Talking about his upcoming trip with Alexis, Randy thought nothing was wrong. Brian's night out began innocently. He met his friend William Clint Florence around 9 p.m. The two visited a few bars near the OSU campus, laughing, drinking, talking. People remember Brian smiling, relaxed, behaving completely normally. After midnight they met up with another friend, Meredith Reed, who gave them a ride to the Ugly Tuna Saloon, a popular campus bar located on the second floor of a building at the edge of a busy entertainment district. The Ugly Tuna is a bar every OSU student knows: bright neon lights, crowded halls, loud music, a narrow escalator leading to the entrance, and above all, security cameras everywhere. To enter the bar, you must ride up the escalator. To leave, you must come back down the escalator. There are emergency exits, but at the time they opened into construction zones blocked by fencing and debris. Cameras covered every entrance and exit. In theory, it was one of the hardest places in Columbus to disappear from. At 1:15 a.m., A surveillance camera captured Brian, Clint, and Meredith riding up the escalator to the bar's entrance. Brian is seen in his green striped shirt, smiling, relaxed, swaying slightly from alcohol but in control. Inside, Brian mingled with patrons, moved around the bar, and at one point stepped outside the main entrance area to talk briefly with two young women. The conversation lasted only a few moments. Then Brian turned back toward the bar's entrance, and that moment is the last known sighting of him. What happened next is where the story becomes unnerving. Between 1:30 and 1:55 a.m., Clint and Meredith tried calling Brian several times. He wasn't answering. They assumed he was inside the bar or in the restroom, so they waited. Closing time approached, and patrons began flooding out, riding the escalator down to Ward Street level. Brian SHAFFER was not among them. Meredith and Clint searched inside the bar. They asked staff, checked corners, bathrooms, stairwells. Brian wasn't there. Eventually, staff ushered everyone out due to closing procedures. Clint and Meredith waited outside, expecting Brian to walk out. He didn't. By morning, no one had heard from him. His phone went straight to voicemail. Alexis, his girlfriend, grew frantic. Brian would never ignore her calls, especially since they were leaving for Miami the next day. Then came the most heartbreaking detail. Alexis, hoping for a sign he was okay, called Brian's phone repeatedly. For 2 days, nothing. Then suddenly, on the second day, the phone rang, not voicemail, not a dead line. It rang 3 rings, then silence. Phone tracing later showed the call pinged from a cell tower 14 miles away, a rural area with no connection to Brian. The phone company said the ringing may have been a glitch, a signal bouncing between towers, or it may not have been. To this day, no one knows. Police obtained the ugly tuna surveillance footage. They watched it frame by frame. Brian was seen entering the bar, but there was one problem. He was never seen leaving. Not by the front door, not down the escalator, not through the service entrance, not through the emergency exits. Every single person who entered or left that bar during the next hour was accounted for, but not Brian. The police began searching surrounding areas, dumpsters, alleyways, construction sites, riverbanks. They drained parts of the nearby Olentangy River. Nothing, no clothing, no wallet, no body, no evidence of foul play. Brian had vanished as if the moment he stepped out of frame, he stepped into a place the camera couldn't see. Not physically, but Detectives began reconstructing the night, questioning the people who were with him. Meredith cooperated fully. Alexis cooperated. Brian's family cooperated. But Clint, the friend who spent the night drinking with Brian, did not. He refused to take a polygraph test. His attorney said he had nothing to add. Police said his lack of cooperation hindered the investigation significantly. Rumors circulated. People speculated Clint knew more than he said. Others believed Clint was simply trying to avoid entanglement. There has never been evidence linking him to wrongdoing, but the silence created shadows, and in a case built on shadows, every unanswered question feels sinister. Investigators explored numerous theories. Some believed Brian left the bar through an emergency exit leading into a construction zone and accidentally fell into debris or machinery. But the area was searched thoroughly. No evidence ever surfaced. Others believed he left with someone, a stranger, a friend, a ride. But cameras showed no such person accompanying a man resembling Brian. Some speculated he staged his own disappearance, devastated by his mother's death, overwhelmed by medical school. But detectives said Brian showed zero indicators of self-harm or withdrawal. He was planning vacations. He was booking flights. He was talking about the future. Then there is the darkest theory, that Brian's disappearance was an abduction or homicide, and that his body was removed before morning. But how ugly Tuna is surrounded by cameras, bright lights, and foot traffic even at night. A violent act in that space would almost certainly leave evidence, yet no evidence exists. Years passed, searches continued. Every abandoned building, sewer line, storm drain, and construction site within a 2-mile radius was examined. Detectives brought in cadaver dogs, drones, helicopters. Nothing. Brian's father, Randy, spent years driving through Columbus, searching fields, riverbanks, empty lots, anywhere a body could be hidden. He posted flyers. He met with psychics. He begged the public for information. Before he passed away in 2022, he left instructions that he wanted to be buried beside Brian wherever Brian is. It remains an unfulfilled wish. One of the most chilling developments occurred 6 years after Brian vanished. Someone attempted to access his online student account at Ohio State. Investigators traced the attempt they discovered. It was likely an automated glitch, an old password pinging the system. Still, the moment ignited renewed fear and hope. Was Brian alive? Was someone using his identity? The answer was no. But the incident shows how fragile the investigation has always been, how every anomaly becomes a question mark. The disappearance of Brian Shaffer has no crime scene, no timeline, no physical evidence, and no confirmed suspects. It is a case built entirely on absence, on what should have happened but didn't. A man walks into a bar and never comes out. A phone rings after days of silence, a friend refuses to cooperate. Cameras catch everything except the only moment that mattered. There is a phrase investigators occasionally use in unsolved cases. People don't vanish, places make them vanish. But the ugly tuna saloona is not a place where people vanish. It is not a forest, not a remote interstate, not an ocean. It is a bar in a busy city block filled with witnesses, security, and surveillance. A place where disappearance should be impossible. And yet, for Brian Shaffer, it was the last place he was ever seen. To this day, his disappearance remains one of America's most haunting modern mysteries, a story where every answer creates a new question, and every possibility defies common sense. A case where a single missing frame of footage changed a family forever. Some mysteries feel supernatural not because they involve spirits or illusions, but because they push against the limits of what we understand about human behavior, probability, and chance. The disappearance of Brian Shaffer is one of those mysteries. It is a blank space on a map, a void inside a bar, a silence on a phone line, and a question with no beginning and no end. The last words Brian ever said were to a stranger outside the bar, wishing them a good night. Moments later, he stepped toward the entrance and into a mystery that has endured for nearly 2 decades. And somewhere between the frame in which he appears and the frame where he should have exited, Brian Shaffer vanished into nothing. Chapter 3: The Vanishing of MAURA Murray. On the evening of February 9, 2004, 21-year-old nursing student MAURA Murray stepped out of her damaged satin sedan on a dark New Hampshire road, apologized to a witness who stopped to help, insisted no police were needed, and then vanished. Not into a forest that swallowed her instantly. Not into a passing vehicle caught on camera. Not into a body of water beside the road. She simply walked into the cold night air and disappeared so completely that nearly 20 years later, the case remains one of America's most polarizing and fiercely debated mysteries. The disappearance of MAURA Murray is different from other vanishings. It is not a clean story with clear suspects, nor a simple narrative of tragedy or foul play. It is a maze of contradictions, unexplained behavior, scattered clues, and missing context. Every detail of MAURA's final 48 hours is dissected by thousands of people online. Every timeline is disputed. Every theory has holes. Every explanation collapses under scrutiny. To understand how a young woman could disappear in full view of multiple witnesses, in a populated rural area, in the middle of the early evening, we must begin with who MAURA was, and with the abrupt, confusing chain of events that led her toward the White Mountains. MAURA was a standout, academically strong, athletically gifted, deeply competitive, and disciplined. She came from a family that valued achievement. At West Point, she studied chemical engineering before transferring to nursing at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. To many, she appeared to have an enviable life, intelligence, beauty, athleticism, ambition. But beneath that image was a quiet, private layer of MAURA that very few people understood. She kept emotions tightly contained. She rarely shared personal struggles, and in the days leading up to her disappearance, something was clearly wrong, something she never fully expressed. 3 nights before she vanished, while working her security shift at UMass, MAURA received a phone call that left her trembling. A coworker said she suddenly began crying uncontrollably, unable to speak. When asked what happened, she said only, "My sister," but her sister Kathleen later said they hadn't discussed anything traumatic. Kathleen mentioned a relapse into drinking, but nothing that should have caused such an emotional collapse. This was the first fracture in the timeline, a moment where MAURA's stable world seemed to slip. The second fracture came on February 7th when MAURA borrowed her father's Toyota Corolla and crashed it into a guardrail near campus after a night of drinking with friends. She wasn't hurt, but the car was badly damaged. Police were called. Fred Murray, her father, later said he was not angry. Accidents happen, but the crash seemed to weigh heavily on MAURA. Then came the most puzzling detail. 2 days later, on the morning of February 9th, MAURA emailed her professors at UMass to say there had been a death in the family and she needed time away. There was no death, no funeral, no emergency, nothing that explained the lie. This was the first recorded instance of MAURA intentionally misdirecting those around her. Why, around the same time, she packed her dorm room, boxes were folded, drawers emptied, posters removed. It looked less like someone leaving for a week, and more like someone preparing for a much longer absence. She printed directions to the White Mountains of New Hampshire, a region she loved, a place of solace, beauty, and deep quiet. She had gone there before with her father, but this time no one knew she was planning a trip. Not her boyfriend, not her family, not her friends. At around 3:30 p.m., MAURA left campus in her old Saturn, a car known to leak coolant and stall. She withdrew $280 from an ATM. She bought alcohol at a liquor store. A surveillance camera captured the visit. She appears calm, alone, focused. She then began driving north. No one knows exactly why she chose that destination. Was she escaping, clearing her head, planning something irreversible? Theories vary wildly, but what is known in the factual, confirmed timeline is that MAURA reached Haverhill, New Hampshire around 7 p.m. It was fully dark, the roads were icy, the temperature hovered near freezing, snow lined the shoulders. At approximately 7:27 p.m., residents along Route 112 heard a loud thump. A car had crashed into a snowbank near a curved morass Saturn. The crash wasn't severe. Airbags deployed, windshield cracked slightly. The car was still functional. A neighbor, a school bus driver named Butch Atwood, stopped his vehicle and approached. He saw a young woman, small frame, dark hair, standing beside the Saturn. He offered help. He offered to call police. MAURA refused both, insisting she had already called AAA. This was not true. There is no record of a call. Witnesses noted she appeared frightened, cold, and possibly intoxicated, though her speech was coherent. She clutched her jacket tightly, stepping away slightly when approached. Something about her demeanor, the distance, the polite refusal, the insistence that help was unnecessary, felt unnatural. After hearing her decline, Atwood drove home and called police. When officers arrived at 7:46 p.m., MAURA Murray was gone. Several details from the scene deepened the mystery. The car was locked. A rag was found stuffed into the tailpipe, something mechanics do to reduce smoke output. Perhaps MAURA was hiding the car's mechanical issues, or perhaps she planned to disable it. No one knows. Inside the vehicle were clothes, cosmetics, textbooks, printed directions. But missing were her phone, her debit card, her backpack, her alcohol purchase, her favorite gloves, things she likely carried with her. The responding officer, SGT Cecil Smith, saw footprints in the snow leading away from the car and into darkness, but the path diverged, then disappeared. Snowfall covered any trail MAURA might have left. Search teams arrived quickly. Dogs tracked her scent 100 yards east, then lost it abruptly in the middle of the road. Experts say that often indicates a vehicle pickup, that MAURA got into someone's car voluntarily or unwillingly. If she had simply walked into the woods, scent would have continued. It didn't, and that was only the beginning. The next morning, her dorm room was searched. The packing, the printed directions, the email to professors, the crash, her refusal of help, none of it formed a coherent narrative. Theories exploded. Some believed she ran away, but to what? With no winter gear, no support, no phone activity, no credit card use. Some believed she planned suicide, but there was no note, no behavior indicating finality. She had trips planned with her father, an upcoming clinical rotation, a boyfriend she deeply cared for. Some believed she crashed, panicked, and succumbed to the cold. But her body was never found, not in the woods, not in streams, not in surrounding trails, not in any of the hundreds of places where remains commonly appear. Others believed she was abducted. Route 112 is isolated, dark bordering national forest. It is possible, disturbingly possible, that a driver offered help and she accepted, but there is no evidence. And in this case, absence of evidence only widened the void. MAURA's family and boyfriend, Billy, arrived in New Hampshire within 48 hours. They knocked on doors, distributed flyers, begged residents for information. They walked miles through snow, brambles, hillsides, riverbanks. They believed MAURA was alive, and believed someone nearby knew more than they said. Decades later, that belief persists. Search teams employed state troopers, helicopters, cadaver dogs, infrared imaging. Divers were sent into the frigid waters of the Pemigewasset River. Every nearby home with suspicious activity was inspected. One property now infamous was cadaver dog hit positive in the A-frame house's closet, decades later. But forensic testing failed to confirm human remains conclusively. The deeper investigators looked, the more the case resisted closure. In the years that followed, MAURA became an online obsession. Forums dissected every detail, every contradiction. Some theories crossed into irrational speculation. Others pointed to real inconsistencies in family statements, conflicting alibis, or timelines that didn't add up. Over time, the noise around the case overshadowed MAURA herself, a young woman with dreams, struggles, and a life cut short by something too fast and too silent for anyone to comprehend. Her father, Fred Murray, believes firmly that MAURA was taken. He has said repeatedly, "MAURA didn't run away. Something happened to her. Someone knows." Law enforcement maintains the case remains active but offers little publicly. MAURA's phone was never used again. Her bank accounts remained untouched. Her remains have never been found. If she had died near the crash site, nature would have revealed something by now. And so, the central contradiction remains. A young woman walking alone on a winter road should leave a trail. She should leave footprints, a scent path, a body, something. MAURA left nothing. Theories continue to crowd around the case. One suggests she staged her disappearance to escape stress, but staged disappearances usually leave paper trails or new identities. One suggests she fled an abusive relationship, but there is no evidence Billy ever harmed her. One suggests she met someone she knew near the crash site, but phone records don't connect her to locals. One suggests she perished in the woods, but 2 decades of search operations have turned up nothing. One suggests pure accident and pure coincidence, a fall into deep snow, concealed by terrain, but dogs would have found the scent. And then there's the silence. Silence that has lasted 20 years. On the anniversary of her disappearance, MAURA's family returns to Route 112, leaving flowers and notes at the crash site. They stand near the corner where headlights once reflected off her Saturn, in a place where dozens of searches began and ended with no answers. Time has not moved the investigation forward. Leads rise and fall. False confessions appear and fade. New technologies attempt reanalysis of old clues. But the core truth remains untouched. MAURA Murray vanished from a public road while witnesses were nearby. And in the decades since, not a single piece of verifiable physical evidence has explained her disappearance. She stepped into the cold night, and into an unsolvable riddle. A riddle with no beginning, a riddle with no end. A riddle that continues to echo across the White Mountains, calling out questions long after its subject walked into the dark. Chapter 4: The Vanishing of Jennifer KESSE. On the morning of January 24, 2006, Jennifer KESSE, a 24-year-old finance professional living in Orlando, Florida, was expected at work. She had just returned from a romantic weekend getaway with her boyfriend. She owned a condo she loved. She had an exciting career. She was talking about traveling, marriage, and future plans. Her life was structured, organized, and filled with momentum. But that morning, Jennifer never arrived at work. Her phone went unanswered. Her alarm clock was silent. Her door remained locked. Her car was gone. And from the moment her employer called her parents, the simple fact became clear. Jennifer KESSE, reliable, disciplined, meticulous, had disappeared somewhere between waking and leaving for work. What happened in that short window would become one of the most unsettling mysteries in modern American history. A case defined not by a lack of clues, but by a single chilling piece of evidence. A person captured on surveillance. Walking away from Jennifer S.'s abandoned car, a person whose face was blocked by camera frames so perfectly that investigators called it the luckiest obstruction a criminal could ever hope for. To understand how Jennifer vanished in the middle of a normal weekday morning, we must examine not just her disappearance, but who she was, how she lived, and why the circumstances around her condo created one of the most haunting timelines ever seen in a missing person case. Jennifer lived at Mosaic at Mitrice, a large condo complex undergoing renovation in 2006. Hundreds of workers, many undocumented, many unvetted, moved in and out freely. Some lived temporarily in empty units. Security was minimal. The property was in a transitional phase, part luxury development, part construction zone. Jennifer had told multiple people she felt uncomfortable around some of the construction workers, not because of anything overtly threatening, but because of how they watched her. She often said, "They stare, they kept cool. I don't like walking past them alone." Her father would later remark that she had voiced concerns repeatedly that the atmosphere around the property felt wrong. But Jennifer was independent. She was confident. She was careful. She kept pepper spray on her keychain. She locked her doors. She lived life the way any young professional woman might, cautiously, but without fear. Her last known night began peacefully. She returned home from a trip to St. Croix with her boyfriend, Rob Allen. It was a perfect vacation, the kind where couples talk about future plans. They were in love. They were solid. There was no argument, no stress, no instability. After flying home to Fort Lauderdale, she drove 3 hours back to Orlando. Arriving at her condo complex around 10 p.m., she spoke with her parents and Rob that night. She was tired but content. She said she would go to bed early and call Rob in the morning on her commute, a routine they followed regularly. That was the last conversation anyone ever had with her. The next morning, Rob waited for Jennifer's usual call. It never came. He called her back. No answer. He tried again. Silence. Meanwhile, at Jennifer's workplace, her absence raised immediate concern. She was punctual to the minute, the kind of employee who would notify someone if she were running late. By 11 a.m., her boss contacted her parents. They instantly felt something was wrong. Drew and Joyce KESSE, Jennifer's parents, got into their car and drove 2 hours from Tampa to Orlando. During the drive, they tried calling Jennifer more than 24 times. No answer. They contacted her friends. No one had heard from her. When they reached her condo around 3 p.m., they found something that made the situation even more disturbing. Jennifer's door was locked. Her lights were off. Her bed looked slept in. Her towel was damp. Her clothes from the night before were laid out neatly. Her earrings were on the dresser. Her makeup from the prior evening was on the sink. Everything suggested Jennifer had woken up, showered, gotten dressed, and simply left for work, except she never arrived. Police initially believed Jennifer may have been abducted on her way to the car, but there was a major problem. Her car was missing. For nearly 48 hours, there was no sign of the vehicle, a Chevy Malibu. Then suddenly, on January 26th, a resident at Huntington on the Green, an apartment complex about 1 mile from Jennifer's condo, called police. A car matching Jennifer's had been parked there since Tuesday morning. Police rushed to the scene. Jennifer's family followed. The Malibu was found backed into a parking spot. This mattered. Jennifer never backed into spaces. She disliked reversing. This was the first small clue that someone else had parked the car. Inside, investigators discovered dust wiped from some surfaces, a DVD player placed on the passenger seat, a fingerprint smudged on the rearview mirror, a shoe print on the floor, no signs of struggle. No personal items belonging to Jennifer, but the real discovery came from surveillance footage. A camera overlooking the pool area had captured the person who parked Jennifer's car at precisely 12 p.m. on Tuesday, January 24th, the very day she vanished. The footage was grainy, but the figure was visible. A person walking calmly, casually, without urgency. A slight bounce in their step, head down, wearing clothes too baggy to identify gender. Walking in full light, but the camera captured images every 3 seconds, and in each frame, the person's face was hidden perfectly behind a decorative gatepost. Investigators were stunned. As one detective said, it was as if the suspect knew exactly where to walk. 3 images were released to the public. All showed the same problem. The gate blocked the face identically. Even advanced FBI enhancement techniques could not reveal a face. This image, this faceless walker, has become one of the most famous surveillance frames in American true crime. Jennifer's parents were horrified when they saw it, not because the person appeared threatening, but because it was clear the person wanted to avoid detection. Their stride was controlled, their pace comfortable, the body language showed no fear. This was someone who had done this before, or someone who felt certain they would not be caught. Investigators began digging into Jennifer's life. They looked at friends, co-workers, ex-boyfriends, maintenance staff, neighbors, construction workers. No one emerged as a viable suspect. Then came another chilling detail: the cell tower pings. Jennifer's phone was never found, but her last phone ping came from a location near her condo, not the place where her car was abandoned. This indicated one thing: Jennifer likely never drove her car that morning. Someone else did. If so, then the person who abducted her must have done so in or near her condo, a property crawling with transient contractors, many of whom police were never able to interview. One witness later reported seeing a man in Jennifer's parking lot early that morning, pacing near where her car should have been. The witness described him as appearing nervous or agitated. Police could never locate the individual. Search operations intensified. Volunteers combed wooded areas, lakes, swamps, construction zones. Helicopters flew overhead. Dive teams scoured retention ponds. Nothing surfaced. Jennifer's parents began canvassing the area around Huntington on the Green, a complex known for high crime rates at the time. Men lingered around buildings. Drug deals occurred openly. Sex trafficking was rumored. It was not the sort of place Jennifer would ever visit willingly. And yet her car was left there. Why? Was it a drop-off point, a dumping location, a familiar neighborhood to the perpetrator, close enough to walk back to her condo on foot? Detectives believed the suspect was someone comfortable navigating that section of Orlando. Meanwhile, investigators requested Mosaic's construction crew lists. Many of the workers were undocumented. Many had incomplete names or no last names at all. Many had already left the site, some back to their home countries. One lead in particular troubled investigators, a foreign laborer who allegedly showed inappropriate interest in Jennifer prior to her disappearance. Co-workers reported he stared at her constantly. He left the country shortly after Jennifer vanished. He was never formally identified. He was never questioned. And no one has been able to locate him since. Years passed. Jennifer's case grew colder. Her parents fought relentlessly, pushing law enforcement, raising awareness, demanding access to records. They refused to let the investigation fade. They refused to accept that Jennifer's story was unsolvable. Then, in 2018, 12 years after Jennifer disappeared, her parents successfully sued the Orlando Police Department, gaining access to thousands of pages of case files, photos, interviews, and reports. What they found shocked them. Leads that were never followed, tips that were never processed, evidence that had not been examined, witness statements that contradicted each other. Critical windows of time left uninvestigated. Their belief hardened into something more painful. Jennifer's disappearance may have been solvable if the earliest leads had been pursued aggressively. In 2019, after national attention surged, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement (FDLE) took over the case. They re-examined evidence, retested DNA, and re-interviewed old witnesses. While they have not released new public findings, they confirmed the case remains active, not merely open. One detail FDLE emphasized privately to the KESSE family was devastating. Jennifer likely never made it out of her condo complex. This strengthens the theory that her abduction occurred during the walk from her door to her car, a distance of only a few dozen feet. It is here where investigators believe the answer lies. She was taken quickly, silently, efficiently, by someone she did not expect. Her belongings in the condo were untouched, suggesting she was not attacked inside. There was no sign of forced entry, suggesting she made it out the door safely. Her car was relocated, suggesting the perpetrator had a plan. The FBI has said Jennifer's case most likely fits into one of two categories: a targeted abduction by someone who knew her routine, or an opportunistic attack by a stranger familiar with the condo property. Both scenarios remain viable. Neither has yielded concrete evidence. Today, almost 20 years later, Jennifer Kesse is still missing. Her parents, now older, still grieving, continue searching. They continue appearing in interviews. They continue fighting for national attention. They continue believing Jennifer is out there, somewhere, waiting for someone to uncover the one missing detail that cracks the case. Every year they return to Orlando, walking the property where Jennifer lived. They visit Huntington on the Green, staring at the spot where her Malibu sat in that surveillance video, the video that shows a person turning, walking, and then vanishing beyond a pixelated frame. This case is not silent. It echoes through every missing persons forum, every investigative podcast, every true crime documentary. People debate the theories endlessly. Was it someone who worked on her building? Someone who followed her home? A stranger seeking opportunity? Someone she knew? But the truth remains buried under time, mistakes, and silence. The disappearance of Jennifer Kesse is not just a cold case. It is a wound. A wound for a family who lost their daughter in a place she should have been safe. A wound for investigators who know the case should have been solved. A wound for the public, who has watched a young woman's life slip into the shadows of a single morning. Some mysteries linger because the evidence is scarce. Jennifer's mystery lingers because the evidence feels just enough to torment, but not enough to resolve. She woke up, she got ready, she walked out the door, she stepped into her normal life, and somewhere between her front door and her car, the world swallowed her. This is not merely a disappearance. It is a question suspended in time. Who took Jennifer Kesse? Where is she now? And how can a woman vanish in broad daylight, leaving behind nothing but a faceless shadow walking away from her car? Until answers surface, Jennifer's story will remain one of the most chilling, unsolved disappearances in American history. A case defined not by darkness, but by the quiet, heartbreaking absence of a woman who should have come home. Chapter 5: The Disappearance of Tiffany Daniels. On the morning of August 12, 2013, 25-year-old artist and free spirit Tiffany Daniels walked out the front door of the small Pensacola home she shared with a roommate. She rode her bicycle to work. She wore bright colors, braided her hair loosely, and carried the gentle, wandering smile everyone knew. She clocked in at Pensacola State College, where she worked in the theater department, painting sets. It was an ordinary Monday in the Florida heat, except for one detail. It was the last day anyone ever saw her. By evening, her silver Toyota 4Runner would be found abandoned near Fort Pickens, deep inside a protected national seashore, surrounded by dunes, wildlife trails, and miles of empty coastline. Her belongings were inside the vehicle. Her keys were missing. Her phone was gone. Her bicycle was missing. A scent trail would vanish in the sand, and every physical clue investigators found would only make the puzzle more confusing. The disappearance of Tiffany Daniels is not the story of a young woman walking into danger. It is the story of a woman walking into uncertainty, into emotional crossroads, into quiet struggles hidden behind a bright smile, and perhaps into the path of someone who noticed her at the wrong moment. To understand how Tiffany vanished into the sun-bleached landscape of Pensacola Beach, we must begin with who she was. Tiffany was not like most people. She lived in color, quite literally. She painted murals, danced barefoot in the grass, rode her bike along Gulf Breeze trails, and wore thrift store clothing bursting with patterns. She worked long hours building theatrical backdrops, but her passion was art, whimsical, abstract, expressive art that spilled out of her studio. She had a playful innocence, a compassion that made strangers feel like close friends. Her friends described her as magnetic, different, glowing. She could make people laugh with almost no effort. She baked cookies for coworkers with no occasion. She loved yoga, sunsets, and spontaneous adventures. But Tiffany also struggled with something deeper. She dealt with periods of sadness and emotional heaviness, not clinical depression, but a recurring cloud that drifted in and out of her life. She had recently broken up with a boyfriend. She felt uncertain about her future. She was also dealing with the impending departure of her roommate, a man named Gary who had lived with her for several months. The day before she vanished, Gary told Tiffany he was moving back to Texas to reconcile with his ex-wife. Tiffany was surprised but supportive. She always supported other people, even when it hurt her. But the news shook her world more deeply than she admitted. Until then, her home life felt stable. Suddenly, everything was shifting beneath her feet. On Monday morning, August 12th, Tiffany woke up early. She hugged Gary goodbye, giving him one of her famous long, tight squeezes. Gary later told investigators she seemed happy, normal, nothing unusual. But the truth is that Tiffany was masking deeper emotions. Friends later said she was overwhelmed. The breakup, the roommate leaving, the pressure to pick up extra shifts, the uncertainty about her direction in life, it was all swirling inside her. At 8 a.m. she clocked into work at Pensacola State College. She didn't stay long. Within minutes she approached her supervisor and asked for the afternoon off. She didn't give a reason. She seemed calm and casual, almost carefree. Her supervisor approved the request. She walked out of the building at around 8:45 a.m., and from that moment forward, no one knows exactly what happened. Tiffany drove west toward the beach. She crossed the bridge toward Santa Rosa Island, passing the glittering Gulf waters and white dunes. Security cameras along the route caught glimpses of her car at various times throughout the morning and early afternoon. At one toll booth, she smiled politely at the attendant. Nothing in her demeanor suggested distress. Then her car headed through the entrance to Gulf Island's national seashore, a vast protected coastline stretching for miles, remote, quiet, nearly empty on weekdays. And then Tiffany Daniels disappeared. The first sign something was wrong came 2 days later. Her employer called her father, Rodney Daniels, after she failed to show up for work. Rodney instantly knew this was not like Tiffany. She was many things, spontaneous, carefree, unpredictable, but she was never irresponsible. She always called, always checked in. Her parents rushed to Pensacola. Her roommate returned from Texas to help, and on the evening of August 14th, a park ranger discovered her car near the entrance to Fort Pickens, parked partially concealed near thick brush. The discovery set off every alarm. Inside the 4Runner, investigators found her purse, her wallet, her clothing, her yoga mat, her art supplies, a half-eaten banana, a jar of peanut butter, her work clothes, her bicycle tire tracks nearby. But missing were her car keys, her cell phone, her bicycle itself. Everything inside the car felt like Tiffany had simply paused her day. As if she intended to return. As if she left only briefly. The driver's seat was pushed farther back than usual, indicating someone taller may have driven the vehicle. But this small clue, like every other detail in Tiffany's case, revealed nothing concrete. Footprints in the sand were quickly erased by shifting dunes and winds. Rangers searched trails, forests, and beaches. Dogs picked up faint traces of human scent but lost them near the shoreline. Planes flew overhead. Boats scanned shallow waters. Nothing. The Daniels family began searching obsessively. Rodney walked miles along the coastline daily, calling out his daughter's name. Tiffany's mother, Cindy, distributed thousands of flyers. Friends gathered volunteers, combed forests, interviewed beachgoers. But as days became weeks, Tiffany's trail grew colder. Then came the sightings. A waitress in Metairie, Louisiana, hours west of Pensacola, claimed she served Tiffany food and water at her restaurant days after the disappearance. She described a woman matching Tiffany's exact appearance, petite, athletic, long sandy hair, wearing bright clothing, but the woman appeared dazed, disoriented, as if in a trance. The waitress said she walked out abruptly with two men described as controlling, watchful. Another sighting came from a hotel worker in Baton Rouge, who reported seeing a woman who looked like Tiffany checking into a room with a group of people exhibiting signs of human trafficking. None of the sightings were confirmed. None were disproven. They were shadows, possible reflections of a young woman lost somewhere between freedom and danger. Investigators considered multiple theories. One theory suggested Tiffany may have walked into the surrounding wilderness, overwhelmed emotionally, seeking solitude, and succumbed to the elements. But search teams found no remains, no clothing, no shoes, no footprints, no scent. Another theory proposed that Tiffany was abducted, perhaps by someone who followed her, or someone she encountered at Fort Pickens. The area is remote enough for a crime to go unnoticed, yet accessible enough for someone to escape quickly. A third theory involved human trafficking, a disturbing but not impossible scenario, given the I-10 corridor's history of trafficking victims. Tiffany was young, beautiful, and alone. She was trusting. She often spoke to strangers. She had once given away her bicycle to someone who needed it more. Her open heart, in the wrong moment, could have placed her in danger. A fourth, more personal possibility. Tiffany left voluntarily, not to run away from life, but to find space, to breathe, to heal. Tiffany was a wanderer by nature. She loved adventure. She loved disappearing into trails, forests, and beaches. But if she left on her own, why leave her money? Why leave her belongings? Why leave without contacting anyone, since her parents don't believe she ran away? They believe she met with foul play. They believe she was taken, that someone noticed her vulnerability, noticed her walking alone, noticed her bright clothes and quiet sadness, and saw an opportunity. One detail haunts them the most. Tiffany's bicycle was missing. A tire track near her vehicle suggested she may have unloaded the bike and ridden into the park, but the track could not be authenticated. The bike was never found. If someone abducted her, they could have taken the bike to mislead investigators. Meanwhile, an anonymous tip emerged. A man admitted to being near Fort Pickens that day, watching Tiffany from a distance. He claimed she was alive hours after her car was parked. He later recanted. Investigators could not determine whether he was lying to gain attention or telling a truth no one else witnessed. Tiffany's story gained national attention. Multiple search teams returned to Fort Pickens with advanced technology, ground-penetrating radar, underwater drones, scent-detecting canines. Each search brought hope. Each search ended with silence. The Daniels family never stopped searching. Rodney would walk every inch of the coastline, day after day, for months. Cindy continued contacting law enforcement units across multiple states. The family hired private investigators. They followed leads to Texas, Louisiana, Alabama. They reached out to trafficking organizations. They spoke with anyone who claimed to have seen Tiffany. Nothing has ever been proven. Nothing has ever been disproven. In 2018, a possible breakthrough surfaced. A woman in New Orleans claimed she had been trafficked and had seen Tiffany alive in a brothel 2 years after her disappearance. The woman described Tiffany's tattoos and personality traits with unsettling accuracy, but she could not confirm a location. After police attempted to follow the lead, the trail evaporated. Still, the detail that haunted investigators was this: Tiffany was not a person who disappeared into the wilderness. She was a person who disappeared into someone else's hands. In the years since, her family founded Tiffany Search, a non-profit dedicated to finding missing adults. They continue holding events. They continue retracing Tiffany's steps. They continue returning to Fort Pickens, walking the same trails she might have walked, searching for the daughter whose laughter once filled their home. Tiffany's mother visits the spot where her daughter's car was found. She stands silently beside the dunes, letting the ocean winds touch her hair, imagining Tiffany's footprints where the sand now lies smooth. She believes Tiffany is still alive. She feels it in her bones. She refuses to give up. Many who study Tiffany's case say it reflects a heartbreaking truth. A young woman searching for meaning, for clarity, for direction, crossed paths with the wrong person at the wrong moment. Others believe she took a bike ride to clear her mind, met someone on the trail, and vanished. Some believe she fell victim to human trafficking, kidnapped, transported along the Gulf Coast, and kept hidden from the world. And then there are those who believe Tiffany left to start a new life, not out of selfishness, but out of a profound need to reinvent herself. But that theory fails to explain the lack of financial activity, the lack of communication, the silence. Tiffany was many things: whimsical, free-spirited, artistic, unpredictable, but she was not capable of abandoning her family. Those who knew her say her heart was too large, too warm, too connected. And so, Tiffany's story remains suspended between two worlds, the world of light she lived in, and the world of shadows she disappeared into. A young woman walked into sunlight, into sand, into salty wind, and vanished without a single definitive trace. Somewhere along that coastline, somewhere on that trail, somewhere beyond the reach of surveillance, Tiffany Daniels stepped into a moment that changed everything. Perhaps someone drove past her and stopped. Perhaps someone followed her. Perhaps she trusted the wrong person. Perhaps she tried to help someone. Perhaps she sought solitude and found danger instead. The truth lies beneath years of shifting sand, beneath layers of silence, beneath a disappearance that feels both deliberate and violently sudden. The case of Tiffany Daniels endures because it reflects something uniquely human. A bright soul can walk into the world, into joy, into sunlight, into freedom, and still be swallowed by forces unseen. Tiffany's parents continue searching. Her friends continue hoping. Strangers across the nation continue sharing her story, because someone, somewhere, knows what happened. And until that truth surfaces, Tiffany Daniels remains one of the most haunting, unsolved disappearances in American history, a woman who stepped out of her ordinary life, into extraordinary mystery, and never came home. Chapter 6: The Disappearance of Amy Lynn Bradley. At sunrise on March 24, 1998, the turquoise waters of the Caribbean sparkled beneath a gentle sky as the Royal Caribbean cruise ship Rhapsody of the Seas glided toward Curacao. Passengers were waking to coffee, ocean breeze, and the promise of an island day. But one woman, 23-year-old Amy Lynn Bradley, was gone. Not missing in the sense of a lost traveler. Not gone in the sense of a miscommunication. Gone in the impossibly chilling way of someone who vanished from a floating city in the middle of an open sea. A cruise ship is the last place in the world someone should disappear from without a trace. Cameras, crew members, locked doors, passengers in every hall, staff awake around the clock. An ocean so open and empty that anything falling into it is instantly noticed. But sometime between 5:30 a.m. and 6 a.m., in a window so small it barely existed, Amy Lynn Bradley dissolved into one of the most enduring maritime mysteries of all time. To understand the weight of that moment, we must begin with who Amy was. Amy Lynn Bradley was athletic, fearless, independent. She played basketball, trained in swimming, worked as a lifeguard, and carried a presence that radiated confidence. Her smile was quick, her sense of humor effortless. She loved music, dancing, friends, and adventure. She was the kind of daughter who lived life loudly and passionately, drawing people in like a flame. Just days before the cruise, she had begun a new chapter of life, preparing for a career, moving into her own apartment, making adult decisions. She was not running away from anything. She was running toward her future. The cruise was a family trip, a celebratory vacation with her parents, Ron and Iva, and her younger brother Brad. It began joyfully. Photos from the trip show Amy laughing on deck, sipping drinks, dancing in the ship's club, wearing bright Caribbean colors. But on the night of March 23rd, something strange happened. Amy and Brad spent the evening at the ship's dance club, where a band called Blue Orchid was performing. The band members were friendly, especially one. Multiple passengers later reported seeing one of the musicians paying Amy unusual, intense attention. But at the time, nothing seemed threatening. Around 1 a.m., Amy returned to her cabin balcony with Brad. They talked, laughed, unwound from the night. Around 3:30 a.m., Brad went to sleep. At 5:15 a.m., their father, Ron, awoke briefly. In the dim cabin light, he saw Amy still sitting on the balcony chair, alive, awake, calm. At 6 a.m., he woke up again. The chair was empty. The balcony was empty. Amy's shoes, the ones she always wore, were gone. Her cigarettes were gone. Her lighter was gone. But her room key, passport, and cruise card was still inside. She had not planned to leave the ship. She had planned only to step away for a moment, and yet she never returned. When Ron and Ivor realized Amy was missing, they begged the ship's security to halt disembarkation in Curacao to seal the ship before passengers flooded off. But the crew refused. They did not issue a missing person alert. They did not check cabins. They did not lock down the gang. By the time anyone searched for Amy, thousands of passengers had already walked freely off the ship. If someone had taken her, they were long gone. Theories began swirling instantly. The first theory, the one the cruise ship pushed, was that Amy fell overboard. But anyone who knew Amy rejected this instantly. She was a strong swimmer. She was a lifeguard. She did not drink heavily that night. She was afraid of heights. She never leaned over railings. She carried herself with caution and awareness, and if she had fallen, the sound would have been unmistakable. The splash, the cry, the movement of water below, but no one heard anything. And then came the witness accounts, dozens of them. Amy was seen after the time she allegedly fell. Passengers reported seeing a young woman matching her description sitting with a band member early that morning. Others saw her walking toward the ship's elevator. One witness saw a woman identical to Amy near the ship's pool at dawn looking distressed. But the most disturbing account came from a family who reported seeing a woman matching Amy's description being forcibly taken off the ship in Curacao, dragged by several men, one with a hand on her lower back. The family did not know a woman was missing until later. They had no reason to invent the story. Their account matched a pattern investigators could not ignore: human trafficking at Caribbean ports. And then the sightings began. Not rumored sightings, but documented, credible ones. In 1999, a member of the U.S. Navy stated that he saw Amy in a brothel in Curacao. She begged him for help. She told him her name was Amy, and that she was being held against her will, but he was too frightened to report it immediately. When he did, months later, the brothel had burned down in a mysterious fire. The next sighting came in 2005. A woman in Barbados named Judy described an encounter with a woman in a restroom who introduced herself as Amy from Virginia. The woman seemed terrified. She was accompanied by two men. She had the same tattoos Amy had: a gecko, a sun on her lower back, a Tasmanian devil, and a Chinese symbol on her belly. This sighting, unlike so many others, had physical accuracy. Details only family members knew. Descriptions too precise to be coincidence. In 2010, the most chilling evidence surfaced: a photograph allegedly taken on a Caribbean human trafficking website, showing a young woman lying on a bed, posing as a sex worker. The woman had Amy's eyes, her jaw, her tattoos, her distinctive mouth shape. Her age progression matched perfectly. Forensic analysts agreed there was a high probability the woman was Amy. Her family agreed. Investigators could not prove it, but they could not dismiss it. Over the years, the Bradley family fought relentlessly. They contacted the FBI, Interpol, private investigators, local Caribbean police, human trafficking organizations. All pointed to the same possibility: Amy Lynn Bradley may have been kidnapped on the ship, smuggled into Curacao and sold into trafficking, where she may have remained alive for years. This theory, once dismissed, is now accepted by many experts. But there were disturbing early signs that were missed. Signs that, in hindsight, feel like warnings. Multiple cruise ship staff members had shown inappropriate interest in Amy earlier in the trip. A photographer insisted she pose for pictures repeatedly. Crew members allegedly mentioned seeing her sunbathing alone. One waiter told her parents, "I hope I see your daughter in Aruba." Why would he say that? What did he mean? Was he simply being friendly, or hinting at something darker? To this day, none of these individuals have been fully investigated. The Bradley family also discovered that the band member who had been dancing with Amy during the last night on the ship reportedly tried to visit their family room while the search was happening, offering to help find her. Why would he go there? Why was he so interested? What did he know? No one can answer these questions with certainty. The disappearance of Amy Lynn Bradley is terrifying, not because she vanished, but because she may not be dead. She may have lived. She may have been seen. She may still be alive. This case is different from others. Most disappearances end in tragedy within hours. Most missing individuals are found alive or deceased. But Amy's case sits in a frightening middle ground. Too many credible sightings to dismiss. Too much evidence that she survived. Too many details pointing toward abduction, too many patterns matching known trafficking routes, and yet, no resolution, no body, no absolute truth. Her parents still hope, not in delusion, but in conviction. They believe their daughter lived, they believe she may still be alive. Her father once said in an interview, his voice cracking, "I think she's out there. I think she's waiting for us. I think she's waiting for someone to bring her home." This case haunts investigators not because the ocean swallowed a young woman, but because it likely didn't. Because the darkness that took her was human, not natural. Because somewhere in the islands of the Caribbean, a young woman may have lost her freedom but not her life. Amy's story remains suspended between hope and horror. It is a question without an ending, a disappearance without a grave, a family without closure, a truth that lies somewhere behind the locked doors of trafficking networks. Until that truth is found, Amy Lynn Bradley remains one of the most haunting unsolved disappearances in American history, a story of a young woman who walked into the warm Caribbean sunrise, and into the hands of people who decided her fate. She did not fall, she did not drown, she did not simply vanish. Someone took her, and someone still knows where she is. Chapter 7: The Disappearance of Bryce Laspisa. On August 29, 2013, just after dawn touched the sky over Castaic Lake in Southern California, a burnt-orange Toyota Highlander sat overturned at the bottom of a rugged embankment, its windshield smashed, airbags deployed, and personal items scattered across the dirt. It looked like the kind of accident that ends badly, violently, the kind of crash that should have left a victim nearby, but the driver, 19-year-old college student Bryce Laspisa, was nowhere to be found. His wallet, his phone, his laptop, his clothes, all inside the wrecked SUV. No footprints, no blood trail, no drag marks, no signs of a body. Just one impossible question: how does someone survive a crash like that, walk away, and never appear again? The disappearance of Bryce Laspisa is one of the most unsettling unsolved cases in modern California history, not only because he vanished, but because of the bizarre 48 hours leading up to the crash. A series of phone calls, erratic behavior, odd pauses, unexplained statements, and long periods of waiting in strange locations created a timeline that feels less like a missing person case and more like a psychological unraveling caught in real time. To understand how Bryce went from a charismatic art student to a young man who drove into the night and was never seen again, we must go back to the beginning, before the odd behavior, before the long drive, before the chilling final call. Bryce was a sophomore at Sierra College in Rockland, near Sacramento, outgoing, creative, funny, a natural artist with flaming red hair and a smile that lit up his entire face. He loved humor, the louder the better. He played video games, he painted, he connected easily with others. People felt warm around him. Friends described him as the kind of guy who made life bigger. He was not withdrawn, not depressed, not the type to run away. But in the days before he vanished, something shifted. Subtly at first, then sharply. Bryce had recently broken up with his girlfriend, Kim Sly. It wasn't a hostile breakup. Only a few weeks later, they were back together, a normal college relationship with ups and downs. But in those days before his disappearance, Kim noticed something alarming. Bryce wasn't sleeping, he wasn't eating, he was drinking heavily, more than usual. He was taking Vyvanse, a stimulant used for ADHD, though he did not have a prescription. Stimulants, alcohol, lack of sleep, emotional stress, a dangerous mixture, and his behavior became increasingly erratic. He gave away his expensive belongings, including a pair of diamond earrings. He texted a friend saying, "You're better off without me." He sent strange messages to Kim, alternating between affection and distance. Friends confronted him, asking what was wrong. His answer was chillingly vague: "You'll know soon." On August 28th, everything collapsed. After attending an evening class, Bryce visited Kim at her apartment. She immediately sensed something was wrong. He looked emotionally drained, hollow even. His speech felt off. His mood was distant. Kim begged Bryce not to drive. She took his keys to keep him safe. Bryce called his mother, Karen, in tears. "Mum, Kim won't give me my keys." Karen, unaware of the severity of his state, reassured him and asked Kim to return the keys. Kim refused at first, telling Karen, "He's not okay, something is wrong. He shouldn't be driving." But Karen, thinking it was a typical young adult emotional moment, asked Kim to hand them over. She did. Bryce left. He told Kim, "I have a lot to do tomorrow." Those were the last words she ever heard from him. No one knew that Bryce wouldn't go home. No one knew he wouldn't return anywhere. No one knew that for the next 24 straight hours he would drive in circles, mentally and physically, along a route that made no sense. After leaving Kim's, Bryce texted his mother at 11 p.m., saying he would call her when he reached his apartment. He never did. Instead, he began driving south, away from school, away from friends, away from every safe place in his life. And then, around 9 a.m. the next morning, he was still driving, now near a place called Buttonwillow, a small desert town off Interstate 5. At 12 p.m., Bryce's parents received a call not from him, but from a man named Christian, a roadside assistance worker hired to bring Bryce gas. Bryce had called for help after running out. Christian described Bryce as polite, calm, and cooperative, but emotionally flat. Not nervous, not excited, just blank. Christian left, but hours later, he noticed something disturbing. Bryce was still sitting in the same spot where he de-delivered the gas for nearly 6 hours. Doing nothing. Going nowhere. Just staring out the windshield. Christian returned to check on him, concerned. He called Karen. He handed Bryce his phone. "Mom," Bryce said quietly, "I'm just relaxing. In the middle of nowhere for 6 hours. Karen, now worried, insisted he start driving home. He agreed, but he didn't go home. He drifted, aimlessly, slowly. Christian followed Bryce's car for several miles to make sure he was finally on the right path. After that, Bryce's trail becomes a series of haunting fragments, phone pings, highway cameras, odd pauses on quiet roads. At 2 a.m. on August 30th, nearly 36 hours since he had last slept, Bryce called his mother one last time. "I'm too tired to talk," he told her, "but I'm fine." Minutes later, a security camera captured his Toyota Highlander driving up a remote access road near Castaic Lake, a rugged wilderness region outside Los Angeles. That road led nowhere, except cliffs and water. At 5:30 a.m., workers arriving for construction noticed a tire track through the brush, leading off a steep embankment. They followed it down. At the bottom, they found Bryce's overturned SUV, but no Bryce. Investigators pieced together the crash. He accelerated intentionally. There were no skid marks, no signs of braking, no attempt to stop the vehicle from launching off the cliff. The impact should have injured him severely. Yet inside the SUV, blood evidence was minimal, the kind consistent with a forehead injury, not a fatal blow. Medical experts believed he survived the crash. He likely crawled out through the broken window, and then he simply disappeared into the wilderness. Search teams arrived. Helicopters scanned the landscape. Dogs followed a scent trail from the crash site to a nearby truck stop and then lost it abruptly, as if he had gotten into another vehicle, as if someone picked him up, as if Bryce walked out of his old life and into something unknown. But the most chilling detail came from the volunteer divers. They searched the lake, again and again and again. No body, no clothing, no bones, nothing. Not a trace of Bryce in the water. And yet, he had vanished. Investigators examined every possibility. Theory 1. Voluntary disappearance. Some believe Bryce, overwhelmed by emotional turmoil, walked away to start a new life, but he had no money, no supplies, no plan, no history of running, and no confirmed sightings. Theory 2. Accidental death. Perhaps he wandered into the hills, injured, disoriented, and succumbed to the elements. But the area was thoroughly searched. His remains should have been found. Theory 3. Suicide. His behavior suggested distress, but the lack of a body, even after extensive searches, challenges this. Theory 4. Foul play. A stranger. A truck stop interaction. A crime of opportunity. Nothing proves it, but the sudden loss of scent at the road raises suspicion. Theory 5. Drug-induced psychosis. Violence, alcohol, and emotional instability could have altered his perception, causing paranoia, confusion, or a break from reality. This fits the behavior, but not the disappearance. Every theory collapses under scrutiny. A young man does not sit in the same spot for hours unless his mind is unraveling. A young man does not drive 450 miles without direction unless he is lost inside himself. A young man does not launch his car off a cliff unless something inside him has snapped, or unless he feared something behind him more than the fall ahead. But none of these explain the final truth. People do not disappear into thin air. Not after a survivable crash. Not on foot. Not without leaving a single trace. And yet Bryce did. His parents, Karen and Michael, refused to give up. They walked the rugged cliffs. They knocked on doors. They camped out near Castaic Lake. They hired private investigators, cadaver dogs, trackers. Nothing. The wilderness remained silent. The lake remained silent. The road remained silent. Bryce's friends, still haunted years later, describe him with a heartbreak that never softens. He wasn't himself. He was scared. He was confused. He kept saying weird things he wouldn't explain. One friend said the most painful phrase of all, it was like he was trying to tell us he was going away. He just didn't know how. The disappearance of Bryce Laspisa is not like other missing person cases. It is the story of a mind breaking open in real time, witnessed through texts, calls, and movements that feel like a slow-motion implosion. A bright, talented young man drove into the dark, and never drove back. Some believe Bryce is alive, living under a new identity, wandering, surviving, disconnected from the life that once overwhelmed him. Others believe his final walk was the last part of his spiral, ending somewhere no one has found. And then there are those who believe something else happened entirely, something outside his control. A victim of circumstance, a target of opportunity, a young man picked up on the road by someone who saw vulnerability. Whatever the truth is, Bryce's story remains suspended between logic and nightmare. A car at the bottom of a cliff, a boy who walked away, and a silence so absolute that it feels impossible. To this day, the question remains, what happened after Bryce opened that broken car door and stepped into the California dawn? Until someone answers that question, his disappearance will remain one of the most haunting mysteries of all time, the story of a young man who reached the edge of his world and vanished into whatever lay beyond it. Chapter 8: The Springfield Three. On the morning of June 7, 1992, in the quiet city of Springfield, Missouri, sunlight drifted through the blinds of a small home on 1717 East Elmar Street. The house was untouched. The TV softly glowed with static. A globe on a dresser lay broken. A porch light bulb was shattered. And the cars belonging to 47-year-old Cheryl Levitt, her daughter 19-year-old Susie Streeter, and Susie's friend 18-year-old Stacy McCall sat neatly parked outside. Everything looked normal, except the three women who lived there were gone. Not missing in the way people usually disappear. Not gone in the way of a runaway or an argument. Three women vanished from inside a locked house, with no witnesses, no signs of forced entry, no screams, and no evidence of struggle. Three people swallowed at once. In silence, in seconds, the case became known as the Springfield Three, one of the most chilling and confounding mass disappearances in American history. To understand how three women vanished from a suburban neighborhood without a trace, we must begin with the night before, the night that ended normally, safely, predictably. It was graduation night. On June 6, 1992, thousands of families across Springfield were celebrating the end of high school. Among them were two best friends, Susie Streeter and Stacy McCall. They had spent the evening attending graduation parties, hugging classmates, posing for photos, dreaming about their futures. They were inseparable, blonde, bright, fun, and excited for the next chapter of their lives. Susie was bold and artistic, with a sharp sense of humor and a distinctive voice that carried across a room. She loved animals and collected odd little trinkets from thrift stores. Stacy was soft-spoken, kind, and stunningly beautiful, the sort of young woman everyone described as sweet to her core. Their friendship was effortless, natural, pure. That night, after attending multiple parties, Stacy called her mother shortly before 10 p.m. to say the girls would spend the night at a friend's house. But the friend's house was too crowded with other teens, so the girls decided to go to Susie's house instead. They drove separately, Susie in her red Ford Escort, Stacy in her Toyota Corolla. Around 2:15 a.m., the two girls left their friend's home and headed to Susie's small house, where her mother, Cheryl, was already asleep. Cheryl, a hardworking cosmetologist, was tiny in stature but fierce in spirit. She had recently purchased the home, a milestone she was proud of. She planned to renovate rooms, build a garden, and enjoy her peaceful life. She adored her daughter, and despite the typical tensions between teens and mothers, their bond was strong. The girls likely arrived around 2:30 a.m. What happened after that is one of the darkest mysteries in American criminal history. The next morning, when Stacy failed to show up for a planned water park trip, her mother, Janice McCall, became concerned. Stacy was punctual, reliable, considerate. She never simply didn't show up. At 8 a.m., Janice called Susie's home. No answer. Repeated calls, still no answer. By mid-morning, Janice drove to the house. Susie's car and Stacy's car were parked neatly in the driveway. Nothing looked wrong. The door was unlocked. Inside, Janice found something that still haunts her decades later. All three women's purses sat lined up together in the living room, not dumped, not scattered. Arranged neatly as if someone had set them down intentionally. Side by side, Stacy's clothes, folded from the night before, sat stacked on the floor. Her jewelry was placed carefully on top, the way she always removed it before bed. Susie's dog, Cinnamon, roamed the house anxiously, barking. The television buzzed with white noise, but the house was disturbingly quiet. Too quiet. Janice searched the bathrooms. She called out their names. She checked bedrooms. Still nothing. On a dresser she noticed a shattered glass globe, the only sign that anything might have been disturbed. On the front porch, someone had broken the light bulb. Had someone smashed it intentionally, to keep the house dark, to conceal an entry or exit? No one knew. Another disturbing detail emerged hours later. Friends who had visited the house early that morning, unaware a crime had occurred, had cleaned broken glass off the porch. That evidence was gone forever. Inside, a message had been recorded on the telephone answering machine, a message that investigators later described as potentially important. But one of the visitors accidentally erased it while listening. That evidence, too, was gone. As Janice continued searching, she found something even stranger. The beds looked slept in, but no one was there. It was as if the three women had woken up to something, a knock, a sound, a familiar voice, and simply opened the door, and vanished. Police were finally called around noon, but by then, the house had been entered by more than a dozen people, friends, family, well-meaning visitors. The crime scene was compromised, evidence was trampled, fingerprints were smudged, potential clues were destroyed before investigators even arrived. Still, detectives pieced together what they could. Nothing had been stolen. There were no signs of struggle, no blood, no forced entry, no screams reported by neighbors, no suspicious vehicles seen. It was as if three women stood up and were erased. Investigators looked into possible suspects. One name emerged quickly: Robert Craig Cox, a convicted kidnapper and suspected serial killer who lived in Springfield at the time of the disappearances. He had abducted women before. He had a history of violence. His girlfriend later told police he was out all night during the time the women vanished. Years later, Cox even hinted he knew what happened, telling a reporter, "I know they're dead, they'll never be found." But Cox never confessed. He never gave details. And without evidence, police could not tie him to the case. Another theory centered around Susie's ex-boyfriend, whose parents' home she had recently testified against in a criminal burglary trial. He had threatened her. He had motive, but investigators found no evidence linking him to the disappearance. Others believed the women were taken by someone they trusted, someone who knocked gently, spoke softly, and convinced them to step outside. Still others believed a stranger entered while they slept, a dangerous intruder who knew how to move silently, subdue quickly, and vanish without detection. Then, months later, came one of the most chilling tips. A waitress in Florida claimed she saw three women matching the Springfield Three, accompanied by rough-looking men, in a restaurant. She said the older woman tried to get her attention, tried to speak before one of the men kicked her under the table. The waitress passed a note to the woman. Seconds later, one of the men grabbed it. Investigators could not verify the story, but the waitress was convinced. She cried, describing the fear in the woman's eyes. Years passed. Tips emerged and evaporated. A bar worker claimed she'd seen the women in a truck stop. A prison inmate claimed he helped bury the bodies. A psychic led detectives to a field. An officer said he saw three figures walking along a motorway in the early morning hours. A local transient reported hearing screams near an abandoned farm. Every lead collapsed. Then came the darkest theory of all. A man claimed the women's bodies were buried beneath a parking garage built shortly after the disappearance. Their remains sealed beneath concrete, never to be found. Cadaver dogs once hit on an area of the garage. Ground-penetrating radar showed three anomalies beneath the surface, but the city refused to excavate the structure. It stands there today. Shadows below, answers entombed. The families, Cheryl's, Susie's, Stacy's, live in a grief that never softens. Three women, three vibrant lives, three souls with futures, gone. Taken from a small house on a quiet street. Never seen again. Cheryl's co-workers left her station untouched for months. Susie's friends kept her photos pinned to their walls. Stacy's mother still wakes in the middle of the night, imagining her daughter knocking at the door. To lose one person without explanation is devastating. To lose three at once is something else entirely. Something colder, something calculated, something deeply wrong. This case haunts investigators because it breaks every rule of criminal behavior. Someone who kidnaps three women would likely leave signs of force. Someone who silences three women would likely leave a mess. Someone who moves three adult bodies would likely struggle. But this person left nothing. No fingerprints, no fibers, no DNA. No screams heard. No witness accounts, no trail, no bodies, no trace. 3 women walked into a dark moment, and the world swallowed them. The Springfield Three remain one of the most chilling, unsolved disappearances in American history, a case where 3 vibrant lives vanished simultaneously from a locked home, leaving behind only questions, silence, and a single broken globe on a bedside table, until someone breaks their silence, until someone confesses, until someone digs beneath a parking garage. This case will remain a hole in America's collective memory, a place where 3 names echo endlessly: Cheryl Levitt, Susie Streeter, Stacy McCall, 3 women who went to sleep on a summer night in 1992 and disappeared into the kind of quiet that only happens when someone else is listening. Chapter 9: The Disappearance of Sneha and Philip. On the night of September 10, 2001, the lights of Lower Manhattan shimmered against the dark water of the Hudson River as 31-year-old Dr. Sneha and Philip left her apartment in Battery Park City. She was a young physician, intelligent, confident, compassionate, and filled with the ambitions of a life just beginning. She kissed her husband goodbye, walked out the door, and stepped into the vibrant pulse of New York City. It was the last night anyone saw her. She disappeared mere hours before the September 11th attacks, an unimaginable collision of personal tragedy and national catastrophe. And because of that timing, Sneha's story would become one of the most tangled and heartbreaking mysteries in modern American history, swallowed by the same chaos that reshaped the entire world. Most missing person cases begin with a clean timeline, a clear last location, a set of witnesses. Sneha's case begins in a storm of confusion, a city collapsing, records destroyed, thousands killed, and the memories of the day stained by shock. But before the towers fell, before the smoke, before the country changed forever, Sneha's disappearance had already begun. To understand her story, we must return to the evening of September 10th, a night that felt utterly ordinary. Sneha was off duty from her medical residency at Cabrini Medical Center. She told her husband, Ron Lieberman, that she planned to spend the day cleaning their apartment and running errands. Later, she visited a Manhattan courthouse regarding a minor issue with her residency, something she was handling quietly and independently. That afternoon, surveillance footage captured her entering Century 21, the department store across from the World Trade Center. She shopped calmly, casually, purchasing lingerie, clothing, and bed items, things consistent with building a life, not ending one. She spoke with no one suspicious. She appeared neither distressed nor hurried. This was the last confirmed sighting of Sneha. At 7 p.m., Ron called home from work. No answer. At 11 p.m., he returned to their apartment. The lights were off. Sneha was not home. The bed showed no signs of use. But this was unusual. Sneha occasionally stayed out late with friends or slept at her cousin's home after dinner and drinks. Ron assumed she would return by morning, but morning never came. On September 11th at 8:46 a.m., as Ron stepped out of the subway near the World Trade Center, he saw something no one could process in real time: a plane crashing into the North Tower, a thunderous blast, a tower burning, sirens, screams, people running, smoke consuming the sky. He sprinted toward home, but the West Side Highway was blocked. Towers crumbled. Chaos took over the world. In the hours that followed, he frantically tried calling Sneha. No answer. No activity on her phone, no trace of her. And as the city fell into terror, one detail became lost among thousands of tragedies. Sneha was already missing. For days, Ron searched hospitals, shelters, triage sites. He posted her photo on walls. He called morgues. He walked the ruins. He begged for information. Everywhere he went, the city responded with the same answer: we don't know yet. The possibility that Sneha had died inside the World Trade Center became impossible to separate from the possibility she had disappeared before the attack. Her family believed deeply that Sneha had gone to the towers that morning, that, as a trained physician, she would have run toward danger, not away from it. They believed she heard the explosion, grabbed her medical bag, and rushed to help the wounded. It was entirely consistent with her personality. Sneha was fearless, compassionate, brave to a fault, but no one could prove this. Because of 9/11s, thousands of identifying records were lost. Security footage was destroyed. Phone towers collapsed. Witnesses vanished. The timeline broke into pieces. Investigators now faced 2 overwhelming possibilities. Possibility 1. Sneha disappeared voluntarily on the night of September 10th. Possibility 2. Sneha died heroically during the collapse of the towers. Both possibilities were shadowed by a third, something darker and less understood. To understand Sneha's disappearance, investigators had to dig into her life before the attacks, into private challenges she never fully shared. Sneha and Ron had been married just 1 year, and like many newlyweds in New York City, they were navigating the pressures of demanding careers, financial instability, and emotional turbulence. Sneha was struggling with the intensity of her residency. She had been reprimanded once for attendance issues. She had disagreements with supervisors. She felt overwhelmed, misunderstood, and unfairly judged. At home, Sneha's free-spirited personality clashed with Ron's structured nature. She loved nightlife, friends, dancing, and the freedom of the city. She occasionally stayed out late with people Ron didn't know, something he worried about. Their marriage was loving, but not without tension. Family members described her as fiercely independent, a woman who resisted constraints, disliked being controlled, and sought emotional escape when under stress. But nothing in her behavior suggested self-harm, nothing suggested she planned to disappear. Her purchases from Century 21 were ordinary, her demeanor was calm, her bank accounts remained untouched, her passport remained at home. There was no sign of a planned departure. Detectives searched her apartment carefully. Her medical coat was still there. Her comfortable shoes, the pair she always wore to the hospital, were still there. Her keys were missing, her wallet was missing, her shoes from the night before were missing. That meant one thing. Sneha left the apartment again after returning from Century 21, sometime between 7 p.m. and midnight, and she never came back. But where did she go? Family members said she may have gone out to meet friends. Ron said she might have visited bars she frequented. The city that night was warm and alive, bars open late, crowds moving freely. But surveillance footage in the area was lost in the collapse of the towers hours later. The window to find evidence closed instantly, and then came the most haunting detail. A witness, a doorman in the building, claimed he saw Sneha returning home around 3 a.m., accompanied by an unidentified woman. But his story shifted over time. Details changed. Confidence wavered. Investigators eventually dismissed him as unreliable. Still, it introduced a frightening possibility. Did Sneha meet someone that night? Did someone accompany her home? Did something happen in those early hours before dawn? And then came another theory, one with no proof, but chilling implications. Some believe Sneha could have been the victim of a crime in the hours before the attacks. New York City in 2001 was safer than the 1980s and 90s, but far from crime-free. Assaults, kidnappings, predatory behavior in nightlife areas. Women walking alone late at night were vulnerable. If Sneha was harmed before the towers fell, even minutes before her disappearance was instantly overshadowed by the catastrophe of 9/11s. Her body could have been concealed, evidence destroyed, witnesses distracted or killed. Police overwhelmed. Thousands of missing person cases were suddenly logged at once, and one woman, one voice, quietly vanished beneath the roar of a collapsing city. But then, a detail surfaced that ignited hope. Investigators learned that 2 unidentified female victims found near Ground Zero matched Sneha's physical description: age range, height, general build, ethnicity. However, forensic identification was impossible in several cases due to extreme trauma and lack of recoverable DNA. Was Sneha one of them? No one could say. And that uncertainty became the prison her family lived inside. Years passed, leads emerged, then evaporated. One tip suggested she had been seen in a homeless shelter. Another claimed she had fled to another state. Another said she survived and chose not to return. Every lead collapsed. And yet, her family held on to one truth. Sneha was a doctor, a healer, a woman who ran toward emergencies. If she was alive on the morning of September 11th, she would have gone to the towers. Her brother, Dr. John Phillip, once said through tears, if she heard people screaming, she would run. She would run straight into danger. That's who she was. In 2008, after years of fighting, her family succeeded in having Sneha officially listed as a 9/11's victim, the only missing person without explicit evidence of being inside the towers. A judge ruled that the circumstantial evidence, combined with her proximity and personality, made her presence at Ground Zero overwhelmingly likely. But not everyone agrees. Some detectives believe she never made it to the towers. Others believe she died before sunrise. Still others believe she may have lived past the attacks. And there lies the deepest heartbreak. Sneha's truth is buried inside one of the darkest days in American history. Had she disappeared on another day, any other day, her case would have been solved. Surveillance footage would exist. Phone records would be intact. Witnesses would remember. Police would have been able to search, But she vanished on the eve of a world-changing disaster that obliterated the single most important thing in any missing person case: a clear timeline. The disappearance of Sneha and Philip remains suspended between two tragedies: a national tragedy that claimed thousands of lives, and a private tragedy that claimed one. She is remembered not just as a missing person, but as a symbol of the countless individual stories swallowed by the chaos of 9/11s, voices lost beneath the debris, the smoke, the confusion, the grief. Did Sneha die trying to help others? Did she get caught in the collapse? Did she vanish hours earlier on the streets of New York? Did someone harm her? Did she run? Was she taken? No theory has ever fully explained her final steps. No evidence has ever given closure. No answer has ever surfaced. And so, her story remains one of the most emotionally complex and devastating mysteries in American history. A woman whose disappearance is forever intertwined with a day the world will never forget, and a truth her family still longs to discover. Sneha and Philip walked into the New York night on September 10, 2001, and into a silence the world was too broken to hear. Chapter 10: The Vanishing of Louis Le Prince. In the late 19th century, when photography was still a new marvel and electricity had only begun reshaping the world, a single man stood on the edge of creating something extraordinary, a device that could capture life itself. His name was Louis Augustin Le Prince, a brilliant French inventor living in England and the United States. He was soft-spoken, meticulous, and consumed with one dream: recording moving images. He was, by all credible accounts, the true father of motion pictures. But in September of 1890, just as he prepared to unveil the world's first working motion picture camera, a device that would make him famous and change history, Louis Le Prince climbed aboard a train in Dijon, France. And when that train arrived at its destination, he was gone, completely, permanently. No body, no luggage, no witnesses, no explanation. A man who was about to transform human culture vanished so thoroughly that more than 130 years later, historians still argue about what happened to him. To understand how such a strange disappearance could unfold, one must understand the man behind the invention and the forces surrounding him. Louis Le Prince was born in 1841 in Metz, France. He grew up fascinated by science, art, chemistry, and optics. His father was a military officer. His mother encouraged creativity. A family friend, a pioneer in photography, introduced young Louis to early cameras and the magic of capturing still images. But Louis wanted more. While studying in Paris and later in Germany, he absorbed everything about chemistry, mechanics, and light. When he moved to England in the 1860s, he married Elizabeth Whitley, whose family ran a school of art. Together they blended science and art. Louis crafted intricate enamel paintings and experimented with new photographic techniques. In 1881, he moved to New York, where he worked with panoramic cameras and strengthened his dream of capturing motion. By the late 1880s, Louis did something no one else had truly done. He built a motion picture camera that worked a single-lens device, clear sequential images, a mechanism capable of recording life as it happened. In 1888, he filmed one of the earliest surviving motion pictures, Roundhay Garden Scene, a brief clip of people walking in a garden in Leeds. It was smooth, it was fluid, it was revolutionary. He filmed traffic on Leeds Bridge, carriages crossing, people walking, life flowing naturally. With these films and his camera design, Louis Le Prince was poised to unveil the world's first working motion picture system. Not Thomas Edison, not the Lumiere brothers, Louis Le Prince. But that future never came to pass. In September 1890, Le Prince traveled to France to visit family and finalize plans before returning to New York, where he intended to publicly demonstrate his invention. This demonstration would have secured patents, recognition, fame, and fortune. But before traveling to America, Louis visited his brother, Albert, in Dijon. They spent time reminiscing, discussing inventions, and sharing quiet evenings. There was nothing unusual about Louis's behavior. He seemed excited, optimistic, and eager for the future. On September 16, 1890, Albert walked Louis to the Dijon station. Louis boarded a train to Paris. It was late afternoon, a still, ordinary day. When the train arrived in Paris, passengers stepped onto the platform, luggage was transferred, tickets were checked. Louis did not get off the train. His luggage was not there, his belongings vanished. No one remembered seeing him during the journey. It was as if he had dissolved into the air. The conductor had no memory of him. The station staff saw nothing unusual. There were no reports of disturbances, accidents, or suicides along the route. The French police searched the length of the railway. They found nothing. No body, no evidence, no clue. Louis Le Prince had entered a train and simply ceased to exist. News of the disappearance spread across Europe and America. Newspapers described it as mysterious, inexplicable, a vanishing without precedent. His family was devastated. His wife, Elizabeth, was both heartbroken and furious. She knew Louis had made opponents in the world of invention, and that suspicion, once whispered quietly, grew louder. There were many theories, and each one still captivates researchers today. One theory suggests suicide. That Louis, overwhelmed by the pressure of being first in a new medium, ended his life quietly. But this theory collapses under the weight of evidence. Louis was on the verge of enormous success. Patent approvals were pending. He was about to travel to America for a public demonstration. His spirits were high. His actions made no sense for someone contemplating an end. Another theory suggests voluntary disappearance, that Louis left his life behind to escape debts or disputes. But Louis had no substantial debts, and he adored his family. There were no signs of distress, no preparations, no withdrawals, no behavior suggesting he intended to abandon everything he had worked for. A third theory, darker and more sinister, points to murder. Who would kill an inventor? Perhaps someone with something to lose. Louis Le Prince's single-lens camera threatened to overshadow other emerging inventors, particularly Thomas Edison, whose company would later claim the first patents for motion picture devices. Edison was known to be fiercely competitive and ruthless in business. Could industrial espionage or sabotage have played a role? Could someone have removed Louis to clear the path for other inventors? There is no official proof, but the timing just before his demonstration raises unsettling questions. Another theory blames family conflict. A rumor emerged decades later suggesting Louis had financial troubles involving relatives, but no evidence supports this. His relationship with his brother was warm, his family adored him, there was no known quarrel. Then there is the strangest theory of all, a theory involving accidental death and cover-up. Some speculated that Louis may have fallen from the train and his body was quietly disposed of by railway workers to avoid scandal. But again, no scraps of clothing, no luggage, no signs of impact were ever found. An accident leaves evidence. This left nothing. Investigators hit dead ends in every direction. Police, family members, journalists, all searched desperately for answers. In 1897, a body was found in the Seine River, but it was unidentifiable. Speculation erupted that the corpse could be Louis, but no records linked the body to him definitively. It was simply one more unanswered question in a case full of them. Meanwhile, history moved on. Edison became widely and incorrectly credited with inventing motion pictures. The Lumiere brothers gained fame. Hollywood was born. And the man who made the first true moving pictures disappeared from the story, lost to shadows. During Edison's 1898 legal battle with competitors, Louis Le Prince's name resurfaced. His family tried to prove Louis's priority in inventing motion pictures. They brought forward his early films, his designs, his notes, but because Louis had vanished, because he never publicly demonstrated his work, the court dismissed the evidence as incomplete. It was a devastating blow. Elizabeth Le Prince fought relentlessly to restore her husband's legacy. She traveled across continents, collected affidavits, raised funds, filed claims, and petitioned organizations. She believed with unwavering certainty that her husband had been killed, perhaps deliberately because his invention threatened powerful interests. She never found proof. She never found peace. She never found him. Louis's son, Adolphe, also fought for his father's recognition, but he too met a tragic fate, shot dead under mysterious circumstances during a hunting trip. His death only deepened the family's belief that they had been targeted. By the mid-20th century, Louis Le Prince was a ghost, spoken of only in technical archives, largely forgotten by the public. His films survived, but the man behind them did not. Then, in the 1970s, renewed scholarly interest revived his legacy. Historians unearthed his original camera. Researchers studied his surviving frames. And gradually, the world realized the truth. Louis Le Prince, the man who vanished on a train, was the real pioneer of cinema. Yet his disappearance still loomed over his story like a fog that refused to lift. Why did a man on the cusp of changing history vanish from a locked train compartment? Why was there no witness, no noise, no struggle? How does a man carrying luggage and invention blueprints walk into a train car and leave no trace at all? Modern theories continue to divide experts. Some believe Louis was killed. Some believe he was kidnapped. Some believe he died accidentally. Some insist rivals orchestrated his removal. Some think he vanished by choice, though nothing in his life suggests it. His disappearance remains one of the oldest unsolved mysteries. In the world of invention, a haunting reminder of how fragile legacies are, how easily brilliance can be buried by silence. Louis Le Prince should have been the name every film student knows. He should have stood on stages, accepting applause. He should have seen audiences gasp at his moving images. He should have lived long enough to watch the art form he created become the world's most powerful storytelling medium. Instead, he stepped onto a train in Dijon, and the world never saw him again. More than 130 years later, his disappearance is still a cold case, a door that never closed, a question with no answer. Louis Le Prince remains both a father of cinema and one of history's most perplexing missing persons. Thanks for watching.